market's way of looking at whether gems expensive or cheap is something called valuation multiples. Because we're still answering the valuation question, and that question is how much is gems worth, right? This question. We're trying to answer this question. And on the valuation multiple side, we've got two components. One is something called price to book. And second is what we call price to earnings. So if we give Gem some benefit of doubt and we say, listen, 2018 was not really a good year, 2019 is more reflective, so let's take a look at where Gem's valuation is in terms of these two numbers, in terms of these two drivers as of 2019. So price to earning would basically say, this is the value of Gem shareholder, right? This is the number that we're looking at. How does this number reflect? Let's do a different shade. How does this value reflect when we compare it to earnings? So what is the operating cash flow for Gems for 2019? So this is 2019, this is 2020, right? What's Gems operating cash flow for 2019? That number is 279. So I'm just going to reflect this valuation as a multiple of this divided by 279. And the other number I would look at is Gem's book. And where does the price to book comes from? What is the book value of Gem's equity, right? So do I have the book value here? Retained earnings. I don't have the book value here. So I'm going to bring it here again. Let's see if I have space. Yeah, I have space here. So I'm going to book value of Gem's equity. Book value of Gem's equity is Gem's equity in 2019 was which number? You go all the way down to your balance sheet where you've calculated the book value. There you go. You've got this value of 184. Total equity of 184. And this number is again changing, right? Because you've put in a simulator in there. There you go. So this book value changes, and I'm going to reflect Gem not just in terms of price to earning, but also this valuation divided by Gem's equity for 2019. Okay, so now I have two more multiples. Now, what do those multiples mean and represent? So let's say Gem's value is 1293. This 1293, I trace it. If Gem's equity is $30 million, which is what's happening in this specific instance, then that 1293 is 44 times current equity. So current book value of equity is about 30 million or $30. Value to shareholders is about 1.2 billion or 1293. That's about 44 times. In terms of earnings, operating cash flow represents about 217, and price to earnings about 6 times. Okay. So first, do we understand these two multiples? Everybody understands what these two multiples represent? We're just looking at book value of equity for Gems as represented on the balance sheet. We're taking the valuation that we have from a model and we're breaking it down, we're describing it in terms of how much more. So, for example, you got a car and the blue book value of that car, the written down value of that car is, let's say, $2,000. And somebody comes in and says, I'll buy this car from you for $20,000. So he's willing to pay 10 times book value, right? Does that make sense? So this number here, 44, indicates that if you price GEM at 1293, you're roughly paying about 45 times book value. That $2,000 car, you're willing to buy that car for roughly about $90,000. Does that make sense? Did everybody get that comparison? I would say 44 is a bit expensive. It's a little pricey. It's you're possibly paying, I'm quite sure that you're overpaying a bit, because GEM does not look like a really exciting business that's going to be worth this much. And we have to think about, where do these multiples come from? That's the next question. But first, we're trying to get a sense of what these numbers represent. Second question is price to earning. So price to earning is what? Price to earning is saying, look, GEM's going to generate an operating cash flow, free cash of about $217 million, right? In 2019. We're just looking at 2019 figures. You're not looking at 2020, 2023. You're not sort of going at all the way to 2027. Simply saying, this is what we're looking at. That's what the numbers look like. So based on this, it's about 6 times earning. So you're paying about 6 times. You're saying, $1 of cash today that GEM brings in, it's worth about roughly $6 based on the valuation model that you've plugged in. Okay, so that's okay. That's not that bad, right? And there's a range of these multiples, and we'll take a look at those range next. All right, so now the next step from our point of view is, we think this is expensive and pricey, right? What this sheet basically says is that it does a simple calculation, and it says, price to earnings, the price to earning ratio that you calculate is essentially calculated by this formula here. And what is this formula? This formula is basically what's your return on equity? So let's say, we've anticipated an IRR of about 8 to 10%, which is what we'd use for GEMs, right? What's your cost of equity? So there's this concept called weighted average cost of capital. Treat weighted average cost of capital as your cost of equity. Then you got a terminal growth rate, which we've put in as about 2.5%, right? And when you plug in these 3 values, you get an answer. That what is the number that you get? So you get about 19 times price to earnings and about 2 times price to book. And that's sort of like think of it as a limit or a cap on your multiples. Okay, that's one part. And then for these values, for this 8%, 6%, 2.5%, what we've done is we've done a range of values for the Middle East, right? And in this range of values, you can see, this is another data table where I've said, growth, if you look at terminal growth of about 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, and then your return on equity about 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, and 9%. Okay. So, if you look at GEM's case, for example, if you say I'm going to do 4%, 6%, enable editing. There it's on. So now if I go to 6%, do 8%, I do 10%, 12%, and 14%, right? This is my return on equity. So the multiples will change. And growth, this is fine, 0.5% to 1. So let's say I turn this into minus 1%, 2%, 3%, and 4%, right? So that's my price to book ratio, the range of price to book ratios that we're looking at. And let me clear this for a second. So no fill. And then for price to earnings also, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, control insert, shift insert, and this I'm going to do minus 1%. So the purpose of this exercise from my point of view is I want to get a sense of, what is a reasonable likely range. So if you think in terms of Dubai's economy, right, over the next 3 years or 4 years, this is likely. Growth, anticipated terminal growth as an assumption about -1% to about 2% makes sense. This is a reasonable range. Okay, so now, so if I look at the ranges, Dubai outlook is going to be about -1% to about 2% on this side. And then from a return on equity point of view, what's likely is going to be about somewhere between these two values. So this is my likely grid, right? This is the grid that I expect, that I suspect is what's going to happen for Dubai. So these cells, this one, right? These make sense. And I'll mark these as green. Is Dubai going to grow at a terminal rate of 4%? No, not likely. Is anybody who invests into gems going to make, a return of 14%? I don't think so. That's unlikely. So from a likelihood point of view, I would say this is essentially I would call this the not very likely. Actually, this is going to be like over my dead body zone, right? That's not going to happen. Is it possible that they'll grow at 3%? Maybe. And get an IRR of, a return of equity of between 6 to 8, possibly. So this is possible. It's a little unlikely, but I can believe it. So I'll sort of mark this as slightly yellow, right? Are they likely to see an ROI of 12%? I'm not too sure. I don't think so that's going to happen. But, I'd say it's maybe. There's a reasonable chance that may happen, right? So this gives me a sense of valuation, right? This is believable. This is stretching it. This is over my dead body. Does that make sense? So we're saying price to book, right? This is for PB. You want to set a higher threshold. You want to see what is a credible, likely, believable multiple that would work out for somebody who buys into gems. So something between 2 and 1 makes sense from a price to book basis. 3 is, if you're really optimistic, and anything above 3 is like, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So if you say 3.5, 3.65, now if you go to price to earnings again, we'll do the same analysis. We'll use the same thing, same benchmark, same numbers, same metrics. Let me clean this up. Okay, so this is gone. So now -1 to 2%. This is my likely range, and about 6 to 10%, right? These two values. So this becomes this is my price to earnings range, and I again mark it and I track it. So there we go. And then this 14% and 4%, not very likely, not going to happen. I don't think so that this is a good bet. So here, and here. Okay, and then on this side, this is stretching it at 3%, but okay, we can think about it. We don't have to believe it, but we can think about it. So there you go. So lighter shade, and there you go. That's these are like caps that you're setting as far as your valuation exercise is concerned, right? So we're saying, about 12 to maybe 20 in earnings threshold is okay. Anything above 20 is being overly optimistic, and 25 plus is not going to make sense. The question is, where do valuation multiples come from? Valuation multiples come from, these numbers come essentially from our sense of what the return on equity and cost of equity is going to be, what the anticipated terminal growth number is going to be, and based on that we get ratios, and then we can look at those ratios and see what is the maximum threshold for those ratios.